For millions of people, asthma is just a part of daily life. But what if the deadliest part of the disease isn't the sudden tightening of your airways, but something much more sinister? A hidden killer that can literally turn your airways into concrete. So let's uncover the deadly secret hiding inside asthma's mucus plugs.
And this isn't some brand new problem. All the way back in 1960, researchers like M.S. Dunhill were pointing to this one critical failure in fatal asthma: the body's inability to clear out mucus. For over 60 years, that simple observation has haunted doctors, because what seems like simple phlegm can become the final fatal blockage.
So that historical problem, well, it has a massive modern footprint. Over 300 million people are living with asthma across the globe. I mean, that is a huge number of people at risk from a mechanism that we are only now, finally, beginning to really understand at the molecular level.
So this brings us right to the central villain of our story, the mucus plugs themselves. Now, these are not just little collections of phlegm. In the worst cases, they can get so dense, so stubborn, they act like biological concrete, completely sealing off the airways. So the big question we've got to ask is, what makes them so different, so persistent, and so incredibly deadly?
To really get what's going on with the plug, we first have to visit the scene of the crime, the airways of someone with asthma. See, they aren't just passive tubes. Years and years of inflammation actually remodel them, fundamentally changing them. It's like they're turned into an overactive factory that's just primed for disaster. Let's break down how. Okay, so first up, the smooth muscle that wraps around the airways, it gets a lot thicker. This process is called hyperplasia. It's almost like the airway is hitting the gym constantly, building up all this muscle. And the result? Well, these super strong airways can squeeze shut way more easily and much more powerfully. All right, second thing that happens, the mucus factory itself goes into total overdrive. The number of cells that produce mucus, these things called goblet cells, it just explodes. Specifically, the cells that make a really sticky, gel-forming mucus protein called MUC5AC, they get more numerous, they even get bigger, ready to pump out massive amounts of this stuff at a moment's notice. And then there's a third piece to this puzzle. The physical structure of the airway actually changes. The walls can buckle and fold inward. This doesn't just narrow the passage for air, it creates all these little pockets and crevices where the super sticky mucus gets tangled up and trapped, making it almost impossible to cough out. So, let's recap. You've got this remodeled airway just ready to pump out and trap tons of mucus. But here's where the research gets really interesting. Scientists discovered a massive clue. It turns out not all mucus plugs are the same. In fact, they found there are two very distinct types of plugs, each with a very different story to tell. Okay, before we dive into that, we need a quick vocabulary lesson. Don't worry, there are just two names you need to remember. Mucins. They're the main proteins that make mucus, mucousy and gel-like. The two players here are MUC5AC, who we've already met, and its cousin, MUC5B. The ratio between these two turns out to be everything. Now let's meet our two plug personalities. On one side, you have paucigranulocytic plugs, which is just a fancy way of saying plugs with very few immune cells. And on the other side, you've got granulocytic plugs, which, just like the name suggests, are absolutely packed with them. And as we're about to see, the difference between them is quite literally a matter of life and death. And this chart, it just lays it all out perfectly. Look at this. The paucigranulocytic plugs, the ones with very few cells, they're the ones found in cases of fatal, acute asthma, and they are swimming in that MUC5AC mucus. The other kind, the granulocytic plugs, you find those more in non-fatal chronic asthma. They're jam-packed with immune cells and have a much more balanced mix of the two mucus types. So let that sink in. The deadliest plugs, they aren't packed with immune cells. They're packed with a very specific kind of mucus. Okay, so that discovery just blows the doors open on a whole new mystery. If the plugs in chronic, non-fatal asthma are so full of immune cells, what exactly are they all doing in there? And who are they? This leads us to the next phase of the investigation, digging into the contents of those granulocytic plugs. And when they actually looked inside these plugs, wow, the numbers are just staggering. A full 92% of the cells inside are immune cells. It's basically an immune cell war zone suspended in gel. But when they tried to identify the soldiers in this war, they found something truly bizarre. So get this. The most common cells, they weren't your standard issue eosinophils or neutrophils, two of the immune system's main foot soldiers. No. Instead, they found these strange, hybrid-looking cells that tested positive for markers of both. It was a biological puzzle. It would be like finding a cell that was somehow a cat and a dog at the exact same time. This was the central mystery they had to solve.
And this is the moment it all clicks into place. This is the big aha moment of the entire story. Scientists were able to piece together all the clues and uncover this dramatic chain reaction, a cascade of events that doesn't just explain where these mystery cells come from, but shows how the mucus itself is what kicks off the entire destructive process.
Okay, let's walk through this step by step because it's wild. First, an immune cell called an eosinophil makes direct contact with that sticky Mucus 5AC mucus. Step 2, the moment they touch, the eosinophil violently explodes. It's a kamikaze event called cytolysis, and it just spews toxic gunk everywhere. Step 3, the body senses this disaster and sends in the cleanup crew, the neutrophils, to try and contain the mess. And here's the kicker. Step 4. While they're cleaning up, the neutrophils literally eat the debris from the exploded eosinophils. They scavenge the evidence, and in doing so, they become our mystery dual-positive cells.
Now, what's so important to understand here is that this isn't just random chaos. This whole reaction requires direct, physical contact between the eosinophil and the mucus. It's incredibly specific. It all depends on these little sugar structures on the mucin protein, and it's all mediated by a specific receptor on the eosinophil's surface. And that specificity is the key, because it means it's a biological pathway, and pathways can be blocked. All right, let's pull that from the microscope for a second. We've gone from the entire lung all the way down to a single molecular interaction. So what does cracking this code actually mean for those 300 million people with asthma? Well, it fundamentally changes how we even think about the problem. What this amazing research really shows us is that we're not just dealing with one single problem here. We're actually looking at two completely different pathologies. First, you've got the acute, fatal problem, a huge, rapid flood of Mucus 5AC mucus into a remodeled airway, forming a dense plug with very few cells. And then you've got the chronic problem, plugs that stick around, get infiltrated by immune cells, and create this self-sustaining cycle of inflammation where the mucus is driving the very immune response that makes it even harder to get rid of. And that brings us to the final, and maybe the most mind-blowing question of all. For decades, we thought of mucus as just a byproduct of inflammation. But what this work shows is that the mucus itself, specifically that Mucus 5AC, can actually trigger the destructive immune chain reaction. So the question is, could the future of asthma treatment lie not just in calming inflammation, but in creating drugs that pacify the mucus itself, preventing this deadly conversation between mucus and immune cells from ever even starting? That is the new frontier that this incredible discovery has just opened up.